All right, thank you for staying with us. Over the weekend, Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Olayemi Kadoso, delivered a speech at the Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria's annual dinner in Lagos. Now, during his address, he announced several initiatives set to be implemented in the coming days within the Nigerian banking industry, and some of them may have dire consequences for smaller deposit money banks that do not fall within Tier 1 category. They include interest normalization, an increase in banks' capital base, and the adoption of an explicit inflation targeting framework to enhance the effectiveness of monetary policy. The move by the CBN boss is geared towards achieving the objective of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's projected $1 trillion economy. It will also ensure that the banks that pull through have adequate capital to service a projected $1 trillion economy. Well, joining us via Zoom from Abuja is Olusegun Elemo, a public finance and policy expert. Segun, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Happy to join.
Right. Some persons will say that this consolidation is not a first-time thing that banks have witnessed in the country. But there are those who are saying that this move or the directive by the CBN is quite ambitious. And I'm wondering if you see it as that.
Well, I don't think it's entirely ambitious, given that we've had similar intervention in the past, even though that's about how many years ago now? About 17 years ago. But when you look at the size of the GDP today, and you look at the projection that the Apex Bank is looking at, you'll know that it's not entirely ambitious. I mean, we have the resources in terms of the people. We have the resources in terms of natural endowments. And then we have the resources, in terms of the expertise to be able to drive that size of economy. Let's give a background to this subject itself. It was in 2004 yes. That the reconsolidation of the banking system was then introduced by the then governor Chukwuma Soludo, who incidentally is also now the governor of Anambra State. And you recall at the time, the capitalization of the banks at the time was 2 billion naira, and he then moved it to 25 billion. When you look at that margin of shift, that's about 1,200+% shift in capitalization. And then when you then denominate the capitalization itself in US dollars, at the time when Governor Soludo made that push, the banks were capitalized at about $187 million. That was in 2004. That was after that recapitalization was shifted to 25 billion naira. So at that time, the dollar denomination was about $187 million. Today, because of the exchange rate fluctuation and the devaluation of the currency, the banks themselves, their assets over the years have now shrunk. And when you then look at it vis-a-vis the current exchange rate, it's nothing more than between $30 to $32 million, that current capitalization. So it was important that the current governor, Mr. Cardoso, now said, okay, if we're going to travel this route, in which the fiscal authorities are saying they want, they're projecting a $1 trillion economy by 2030, then the financial service sector must be ready to accommodate that. So I don't think it's entirely ambitious. Also is that when you look at what is projected, maybe something around maybe about 56% push in terms of the size of the GDP itself. Because currently we're doing $440 billion. That was as at 2021. And then we're looking at $1 trillion by 2030. So that's just about 56%. I don't think it's entirely ambitious.
Okay, so in all of this that you have said, there's this issue of trust. And you can understand why I'm saying that now. How can the CBN rebuild trust while also managing liquidity that will help us curb inflation?
Well, for me, is that, I agree with the question that you just raised. There's been that trust deficit, and that's also largely because the central bank, moved away from its core function of stabilizing prices, providing monetary policy direction, controlling inflation, all of those macroeconomic, parameters. It then moved to fiscal interventions, providing loans to farmers, intervening in rice production. I mean, that is entirely laughable, under the previous governor. But I've listened to the current governor of the bank, and he has said that, you see, the bank is just going to focus on its core objective of stabilizing prices, controlling inflation, or managing it, or whatever nomenclature you put at it, and ensuring that those macroeconomic parameters are put to proper checks. So with that, if the bank is then able to focus on that and just leave the fiscal authorities to do what they have to do in terms of fiscal interventions through the fiscal instruments of debt, of budgets, and all of that, then people or the stakeholders will be able to take the Apex Bank more seriously. And then even, investors outside our shores will then, be able to, rebuild their confidence in the capacity of the Apex Bank to regulate the financial service sector and ensure, that all their interests, are well catered to. So I think it's just about the bank focusing on its core objectives.
Right, but there are concerns with this move by the CBN, especially for banks that do not fall within the Tier 1 banks, and then those who are set to be national, regional, or merchant banks. Talk to us the implication of this move by the CBN on them.
Well, you see, the bank knows, the capacity of the DMBs. So it will be entirely at the discretion of the bank. I mean, let's do, for instance, the landscape of the financial service sector as of today. We have about maybe 21 commercial banks. We have, 860, microfinance banks. There are about 5 discount houses, 64 finance corporations, and then you have 5 DFIs. DFIs are, development finance institutions. It will be, that's why they are the regulator. They know the capacity of these financial institutions, and they know what they can do. And with the demand that they are now placing on their table, they know who is able to do what. Whether there will be mergers or, absorption and all of those, I think it will be, we're waiting to see. In itself, the bank has not disclosed the new, capital structure.
But what do you see? What do you see from your experience with the banking sector and what has happened over the years? What do you see happening?
Well, I don't want to preempt the governor, but with what happened in 2004, it was about 1,200 plus percent push. Whether the governor will be able to drive the DMBs to do something similar, because if you are saying 1,200, now you'll be looking at something around 300 billion naira. how much that in dollars maybe currently you'll be looking at something around 300 of plus, maybe 300 plus or 350 to 400 million dollars in terms of capital structure. So now, do they have the capacity to do it? I think they have the capacity to do it. And that's where maybe, for instance, there will be some new mergers, there will be absorption and things like that. And there will be acquisition and things like that. And it will also create a window for foreign investors to then look into the country and say, oh, if this kind of restructuring is taking place, what kind of advantage can I then explore as a foreign investor? Perhaps this will drive significant foreign direct investment into the country, and I think you can take my word on that. And of course, it will help to then stabilize the local currency, because once we have inflows, then there will be more stability for the currency. So I think it's a good move. Whether the governor will be able to drive the banks to then do something close to 1,200% is what we're waiting to see.
Well, I think I would say I like your optimism here. Of course, many might not share that same optimism you have for the Apex Bank and, of course, for the growth of the economy. But in a recent event, Cardoso said Africa's largest economy could grow by 3.9% in the fourth quarter. And you are also sharing that optimism. But the question is, we import a lot, and we talked about that earlier on the show. We import a lot, and that affects the Naira. With the dollar rate so high, how do we grow in the fourth quarter to 3.9%?
What we need to do is very simple. Just stabilize the crude oil production first. Make sure that we're able to at least, have a headroom in that regard. If we're able to stabilize our production and meet our OPEC quota, then we'll be able to then use the funds generated from there to reflate other sectors of the economy. I mean, I was listening to you when you were discussing the Jacques syndrome. And honestly, it's not, an entirely, doomed situation for Nigeria because, young people and professionals are leaving the country. On the flip side is that the country then need to re-strategize. As much skills that are being exported out of the country, how many can we reproduce locally? I think those are the kind of discussion that we should focus on. There are different kinds of commodities or services that you can export out of your country. The GDP itself is measured by three main factors: consumption, the private sector activity, and then government functions. And all of that is summarizing how much disposable income do people have to be able to consume. What is the level of private investment in the economy? What is the amount of government interventions in terms of investments? How much is government spending? Then you then also add all of that to your exports minus your import. Now, what I have said is that there are different services you can export. You can export human resources. It depends on the skill, the soft skill of those people who are leaving the country. When they leave the country, if they are talented and they have the skills to be able to contribute to those countries where they move to significantly and earn significant income that they can repatriate back home to help the economy, that is some inflows into the country. So we shouldn't really be bothered about whether people are leaving the country, or all of that. What we should focus on is what expertise are being, are migrating away from the country, and all of that, and how can we reproduce those expertise within the system so that we don't fall short, of those services that should help the economy. But I think for me is that we have the capacity to do the $1 trillion economy We are the biggest economy in Africa, followed by South Africa. And whether the economy can grow, to that point where, the governor of the bank just mentioned, I think we have the capacity to do it. We just need to focus and get our heads up.
Right. And that's where my next question is. We know that this move is not just a regulatory requirement alone, but is perhaps to position banks for this, for the intention of the president to have a $1 trillion economy. Talk to us how this will position the banks to be able to achieve that.
Well, the point is, the banks, will have to, be prepared to manage all the fiscal risk, the financial risk that will be associated, with the current projections for a $1 trillion economy. And then of course, to have a $1 trillion economy, you will need, like I said, the consumption of the people have to go up. And how will the consumption go up if the disposable income is not there? How will the disposable income be there if there are no significant investments in real sector? And who is going to loan those operators in the real sector? They are supposed to be the commercial banks. Where will they get the liquidity to provide for the manufacturers, for operators in the real sector? So I think that is what the governor of the Apex Bank is trying to prepare, the banks for. That if we are serious about achieving these targets, then we need to recapitalize to manage, the financial risks involved, and then to also be able to, liquidate all of the proposals that will come in terms of, whether you are in the manufacturing sector or whatever sector you're operating in, you will need liquidity to be able to, to expand. Because what we are trying to do in summary is that we are trying to expand the economy, expand production, expand consumption, expand investment, expand, government spending. That's what we're trying to do. Government have their roles to play. The people have their roles to play. The private sector have their roles to play. All of these come together to achieve, this projection. So the commercial banks being, a strategic partner in that regard will have to be adequately prepared, for all of this in the days ahead.
You mentioned about the roles of the different agencies in Nigeria. Of course, you mentioned the government, the public sector. But my concern as well is, what is the role of the private sector in all of this?
I just mentioned that the private sector itself, like I said, the GDP is the total output within your borders, within your shops. That is the total amount of value of what you call the total value of goods and services produced within your country. That's how GDP is calculated. And to then compute your GDP, you would need the consumption of the people. You will need private investment, and that's where the private sector comes in. How much of investment do we currently have within the private sector? We are now trying to expand.
And that's the major question here now. How much of these investments do we have?
That's the point. Well, I think I'll leave that to the relevant associations who are responsible for giving us the data in terms of the size of the investment for the private sector. But what we are trying to, what I understand that the government is trying to do now, and then the Apex Bank is also supporting, is we're trying to expand everything from consumption to production to investment, whether in the private sector or for government, and then the government spending in terms of annual budgets, and then what we're exporting vis-a-vis what we're importing. So all of that we need to shift. The projection is that we did 200% GDP growth in 17 years. As at 2004, when recapitalization occurred, The GDP at that time was $135 billion. $135 billion. As at 2021, that's about a space of 17 years, we are then achieved $440 billion. That's about 200 plus increase. What we are now trying to do is to do an extra $300 billion plus. To do an extra $300 billion plus. To do another $560 billion plus. What we did in 17 years was to add $300 billion. What we are now trying to do now in the next 7 years, between now and 2030, is to add $560 billion. If you ask me, we have grown to an appreciable degree in terms of technology, in terms of expertise, in terms of the size of the investment available, and our opportunities to explore capital, outside the shores. So, can we do extra $560 billion in 7 years? I think we can do it. I think it's possible. What we just need to do is for government to provide the enabling environment. There are some,
now that's the issue, Segun, because that was where I wanted to take you up on the current economic climate, the situation in the country, the fact that we have seen companies leaving the country as we speak because of the situation on the ground. We have also seen matters of security. These are issues that investors would look at to want to know if this is the right place to push in their investment, don't you think?
Certainly, you are very, very on point there. I think where the government, the federal and the states and subnational, all of the subnational governments, now need to come in is now you're trying to expand, especially private capital. So that private capital will flow along reasonable pathway. And what I call reasonable pathway is that you cannot put your money in an economy that you're not sure you'll be able to get your returns. And the current president, President Tinubu, continues to say in all of his engagements, whether home and abroad, that he can assure the investors that when they come in, they will be able to take out their capital, whether in terms of repatriation of their funds or in terms of return on investments. I think he continues to assure, foreign investors on that. What we then need to see in terms of real action on the ground is, for instance, power generation. How much can we do in the next 7 years? Can we follow through? So that is on the one hand. Also self-sufficiency. For instance, let's even talk about refined petroleum products. Self-sufficiency in that regard. Can we quickly solve that problem such that we can be self-sufficient in terms of petroleum products? We don't have to import again. If we're able to do that, you will be sure that significantly you have created a wide push between our export and our import. And that will certainly have a dent on the GDP. Also, in terms of agricultural products, food products, and clothing, and all of that, can we quickly do something? How much can we do in the next 7 years? I think is then left, for the government, like I said, the federal and subnational, to then begin to look at that, because investors will only come when they see a reasonable pathway to bring in their investments.
There's also the question of implementation of policies.
Oh, yes, certainly. And talking about implementation of policy, we have the Nigeria Accountability Summit, coming up in the next 2 days, thereabout on Thursday in Abuja here. And we are convening all policy actors and field experts. Our focus mainly is to look at challenges around implementation of policies, and then to agree on feasible solutions, and then pursue, expected changes in that regard. So we are very big on that, and the civil society, I think our organization and 10 other partners are working on that. And this is going to be an annual assessment of how much of implementation of what government has committed to do, how much of it are they doing? And we're going to, be assessing all of that annually, starting from this, Native Summit, coming up on Thursday.
After assessment, what next?
No, certainly, once that assessment is done, we will find out where the gaps are, and then we will also identify all of the actors that are relevant to plugging those gaps. And of course, as you know, we in the civil society are very big on advocacy. We will then pursue with advocacy with all of these relevant actors to ensure that we realize all of the expected changes that will then push implementation of policies to the point where it will be effective and it will be reflective in the lives of the people.
Now, Segun, let me quickly put this question forward to you. If you look at the papers this morning, the Federal Executive Council has okayed a $1 billion loan. And if you recall, just last week, the Minister for Finance was talking about the fact that Nigeria was no longer positioned for borrowing as we speak. I wonder what you make of this current development.
No, certainly we are not. And one of the subjects we're also treating at the Accountability Summit next tomorrow is the issue around, debt sustainability, debt structure, and all of that. If you ask me, I think we've done enough in terms of borrowing. But again, government activities have to continue. And that's why I said earlier that we need to, first of all, stabilize the production of crude oil so that we can at least meet our OPEC quota and, get the necessary revenue, to flow in so that we can then, limit, debt obligations and new, fresh, debt proposals. If we're able to do that, you'll see that all of these issues, will be resolved. Why the government is also about, borrowing, it's also because of the pressure on the local currency. The demand for FX is increasing on a daily basis, and part of it is also because we're importing refined petroleum products. So that's why all the refineries need to come up on stream as fast as possible. All the timelines not shifted. Those timelines that have been committed to must be met and delivered on. Once we're able to do that, we will then limit our obligations in terms of debt, and we can then focus on growing the economy.
All right, Olusegun Elemo, public finance and policy expert, thank you for your time on the program.
Thank you for having me.